I've got 2 kids. One of them is transgender, but it wasn't just my child who transitioned. I did too. My son, oh, I've got a clicker. Here it is. Click. There we go. That's my family. They're so cute. My son has always known who he is. In fact, the moment he could speak, he was telling me he was a boy, even though we thought he was a girl. Not understanding what he was saying and not knowing what to do with that information, I told him he grew up to be anything he wanted to be, a science girl, a sporty girl, an adventure girl, and that I'd love him no matter what, but that he'd always be a girl. I loved him in the best ways I knew how, but that wasn't always the ways that he needed. I noticed how his confidence was diminishing, how he was becoming more withdrawn and more anxious. He was having a hard time sleeping, he had constant tummy aches. 6-year-olds shouldn't be losing weight. My husband and I tried everything, but with a lack of resources, support groups, and guides back then for parents of transgender kids, we were just simply at a loss. We let him get that cool buzz cut he always wanted and decided eventually that wrestling him to the ground every day to put a sundress on was just a battle we didn't want to have anymore. And over time, he looked more and more like your stereotypical, American white boy, right? And we, even though we were still calling him a girl, and we thought that was enough. But gender identity, who you are, that's your gender identity. That's different than your gender expression, which is how you present yourself to the world. I get that now. We didn't know that back then. Back then, we thought our child was just a tomboy, not understanding that he was actually a boy. I did my best. I truly did. I wanted nothing more than for my son to be happy and thriving and whole, but in order to help him, I needed to transition. You see, I'm a child of the 80s, a time when HIV/AIDS was tearing through the LGBTQ community and killing beautiful, vibrant, inspiring, promising gay men across the world. We call it the gay plague. And many of these beautiful men died alone. Their families were just too embarrassed or too ashamed to even say goodbye to them. I was taught at an early age that the lives of LGBTQ people were not worth saving, and when they died, they were not even worth mourning. A decade later, when I was in high school, the worst insult you could call somebody was gay, whether or not they actually were. Some of the funniest jokes that I laughed the hardest at were jokes told at the expense of the LGBTQ community. And I told my fair share of those jokes too. I thought I was so cool. I didn't know any better. These were the messages being told to me from a very young age. My mom certainly never encouraged this type of thinking or behavior, but it was just kind of everywhere. Like when you go to the pool in the summer, you don't have to jump in to get wet. If there's enough people there splashing around, it's just going to get on you, right? That was the world that I grew up in. That's my background, right? So that's my understanding of the world and how people fit into it. And because of those beliefs, my child was hurting, despite my very, very best efforts to the contrary. I was hurting my child. Something needed to change. And it wasn't my child, it was me. The very first word in the rule of Saint Benedict is listen. Listen. And not just listen, but listen carefully and attend with the ear of your heart. So for years, I was watching my son. I saw his actions, I felt his emotions, I heard his words, but I wasn't listening. And the pain it was causing him was obvious. So one night, just shy of his 7th birthday, I finally listened. It was almost bedtime, and as usual, we were having a quiet moment together before tucking him into bed. He had just gotten out of the bath, and he was shiny, and squeaky, and smelled like bubbles. His hair, which was already short by then, was freshly combed, and he was wearing his favorite Buzz Lightyear jammies. And we were in my bedroom, having a good snuggle before bed, when I asked him a question that changed my life. I looked right at him at the end of my bed, and I said, "Hey, Doodlebug, you know, I noticed you've been really kind of sad lately. I'm just wondering, do you want me to call you my son instead of my daughter? Are you really a boy and I just haven't been listening?" And he looked up at me and he just nodded. Yeah. And his eyes were both hopeful and embarrassed, like he had asked for too much. Right, like my son was asking his mother to see him as his authentic self, and that was somehow too much. He told me his new name. Apparently he had been thinking about this for a while. And he asked me if I could help tell his teachers at school, which of course I did. I agreed, I hugged him tight, and I reminded him again that I would love him no matter what. Then I kissed him on his freckled face and sent him to bed. That conversation changed my life and was a pivotal moment in my transition. It's hard to hate up close. It's hard to hate up close. Like St. Benedict, I listened and attended with the ear of my heart. And I heard a child yearning to be loved, validated, supported, and affirmed for who he truly is. I've only ever wanted both of my kids to be full of joy and know that they're loved unconditionally. But what I was showing them and how I was treating them were the same damaging lessons I learned as a child, right? That you had to fit neatly into these binary boxes in order to be accepted in the world. No more. What I realized in that moment is that my son is just as perfect and miraculous today as he was on the day of his birth. He was still my baby, just with a new name and pronouns. If I didn't care about the gender of my child when I was pregnant with him, why would I care today? Nothing about him needed to change, but everything about the world did. So his dad and I gave him the space to live his truth out loud. Many parents of trans kids have a sense of sadness when their child comes out, mourning the child that they thought they had, processing some pretty big feelings of grief. That was never my experience. My husband and I rejoiced. We celebrated. Because for the first time in years, our child was happy and alive again. His grades soared. His appetite returned. He was no longer shy and awkward around other kids because he knew that he would be celebrated and seen as the boy that he is. It was almost as if someone had come into our house and tore open like all the curtains and the windows and just let in the fresh air and sunshine. Just like that. It was like our dark home was suddenly full of light and life again. So today, my son is the most popular boy in 8th grade. He's 3 inches taller than me, which is rude. He plays just about every musical instrument under the sun. His favorite is the ukulele. He also plays the cello, the vihuela in his mariachi group. He plays them all. He's a competitive gymnast, a 2-stripe black belt in Taekwondo, who can break boards with his bare feet. And he loves a good fart joke, like every boy. He's a straight-A student who loves his cats and tolerates his little sister. In a word, he's thriving. Giving kids support to live authentically is part of what's called gender-affirming care. The same type of care that we provide to cisgender kids. So cisgender means not transgender, right? It's the same type of care, really, that we give to cisgender kids without batting an eye. But this type of care is being criminalized and attacked in countless states across the country. Fun fact, my husband and I are under an active CPS investigation in the state of Texas because we provide this gender-affirming care to our child. Whether it's a bathroom bill, a religious refusal bill, a sports bill, or a medical ban bill, there are many people in this country who are making the same mistake that I made all those years ago. They're not listening. They're not listening. They think that by denying a transgender child's identity, the trans kids will just no longer exist. And to some degree, they're right. Not because trans kids will stop being trans kids will just stop being. There is a direct correlation between anti-transgender legislation and rhetoric and calls to the Trevor Project, which is an LGBTQ suicide prevention hotline. When North Carolina passed a statewide bathroom bill in 2016, calls to the Trevor Project from North Carolina spiked. When Trump talked about banning transgender people from the military, calls spiked nationwide. And in Texas, where I live, calls to the Trevor Project were up 150% in 2021 compared to 2020. The reason? Texas had a 10-month-long legislative session that put a target on the backs of trans kids across the state with 75 anti-transgender bills filed. 75. Think of that. Trans kids, let this sit with this for a second. Trans kids were more traumatized by a group of adults than they were by a global pandemic, right? A global pandemic that shut down their schools, birthday parties, sleepovers, extracurricular activities, Christmas with grandma. What happened in Texas was more traumatizing and more harmful to these kids' health than a global pandemic. But data show that when trans kids are loved, affirmed, and supported in their gender identity, like my son is, their mental health is statistically the same as their cisgender peers. Being trans is not a mental illness. I'm going to say it again. Being trans is not a mental illness. But treating anyone the way we treat trans people, by legislating and debating their lives out of existence, can absolutely cause depression and suicidality. Shame on us. In 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul describes love as patient and kind. It doesn't dishonor others. It rejoices with the truth. Love always protects. When my child told me he was transgender, nothing about my love for him changed. In fact, it only grew because I was so honored that he trusted me enough to share something so vulnerable and important. I did not put conditions on my love for him. I've always told him I would love him no matter what, and I mean it. I love both of my children unconditionally. Like the Apostle Paul described, my love honors them. My love rejoices with the truth, and my love protects them always. And y'all, we need to stop with this hate the sin, love the sinner crap. Stop it. Enough. My child is beautifully and wonderfully made in the image of God. His gender identity is not the sin. The sin is the way we treat transgender people. The sin is the way we treat transgender people, these beloved children of God. Criminalizing their loving parents, banning literal children from bathrooms and activities, sending them off to conversion therapy when we are the ones to need to be converted, that is the sin. Trans people are not the ones who need to change. My son has always known who he is. We are the ones who need to change. We are the ones who need to listen carefully, not to the politicians, the pundits, or the preachers who continue to debate the existence of an entire group of people, but to the very people whose existence is being debated. Stop debating people. Stop it. Listen carefully. Listen carefully to what trans kids are telling you, because that, my friends, that is how we save their lives. Are you ready to transition?